I've watched a lot of war documentaries over the years and had been struck by, in World War II documentaries, for example, how few survivors were left of D-Day or Pearl Harbor. And when they had a chance to interview these mostly gentlemen, they were in their 80s or 90s, and their memories were still pretty good, but had faded. And then one night with a whole bunch of my pilot buddies here in Vermont, where, as you sometimes do after a drink or two, you ask people where they were when, whether it was President Kennedy or President Reagan, or in this case, where were you 9/11? And knowing they were involved, but not really knowing the depth of the involvement.
Most of the people at the hockey game have known each other for 30 years. And we've all flown F-16s together for decades. And we're all best friends. But no one knew Scott Baldwin's story. And that prompted us to ask Phil Murdoch, what were you doing? And he told his story. And then Steve Cray told his story. And then I told my story.
Mike Doobie and Duck and Baldy and a couple of them started telling their story, and I knew little pieces of it, but I didn't know the whole story. I didn't know how involved they all were and how big a role the Vermont Guard played. But I don't think many people realize the very first people who had to react militarily to 9/11 were actually pilots who were flying in the sky literally that morning with shoot-down orders.
This documentary is just one of thousands, of stories. And not until we all sat down as a group and started to tell stories about where you were that day and how they were all in some way connected, did we realize that, hey, there's a story to be told here.
And as close of friends as all of us are, no one knew the story. No one knew what we were doing. And Jonathan Blanchet said, we have to put this on tape.
Like so many D-Day soldiers, they just thought they were doing their jobs. There were other things that could have happened that day that didn't happen because these guys were ready to defend the country.
I was walking across the street, gorgeous, I just remember the sunny, beautiful day, crisp, cool fall morning. Walking between the headquarters building and the operations building, and somebody had said an aircraft had hit one of the buildings, one of the trade centers.
For some reason, I flipped on the TV. And we don't normally watch TV in the morning, and I certainly never did. All of a sudden, the image of the plane hitting the tower came in. I was like, hey, Bill, because since he flew civilian airplanes as well as military ones, he would have a better idea if this is a possible accident, which I couldn't think it was an accident. You don't go that far off course.
We're having a regularly scheduled morning meeting, and my office came and pulled me out and said, I think you need to see what's happening.
My first thought was that it was a small commuter or maybe a helicopter, just a tourist aircraft that might have hit the tower. We didn't even break up our meeting. We just kept pressing along.
And then we saw the second plane hit the building, and we knew that this was not an accident.
How much time do you have in a pilot?
Oh, it was another...
Oh, no, okay.
Explosion.
Explosions, multiple explosions, ladies and gentlemen. We just saw another explosion. Obviously...
We're just watching it again. It's the first time. This is now...
This is the other tower.
We're watching also on the screen, it appeared the other airplane. And then it flew into the other tower. And then when that happened, we both kind of looked at ourselves, and that's not a coincidence. We immediately realized it was an attack. It had to be a terrorist attack of some sort.
As I walked into the Supreme Court, we had news of the second one. When I came in there, I whispered to the Chief Justice. I said, there's a terrorist attack going on. They hadn't heard anything about it because it was a closed meeting and all. Just then we heard boom. And somebody came in and said they had heard there was a car bomb had gone off at the State Department. We looked out the window, Because looking out across Potomac where the Pentagon is, you could see smoke coming up.
I was on the 7th floor of the Hart Senate office building, and I could see that the aircraft had just hit. It was definitely not a helicopter, and it was a huge fire, huge black smoke, and very, very much somebody had crashed something into the Pentagon.
I was actually on a training mission, so I was actually flying with my wingman, Scott Baldwin. We'd probably been airborne about maybe a half hour, and when we got a call from Boston Center, which said that we had to return to base immediately.
And we were probably over Whiteface Mountain or something, and Boston Center came up on guard. This is Boston Center on guard, check cockpit security, which I'd never heard before. And here we're sitting in single-seat fighters, so I sort of jokingly said to Bear on my Victor frequency, well, my cockpit's secure, how's yours? And not realizing that what was going on at that time.
So I asked Boston, I'm like, well, say reason. And Boston Center said, well, we can't tell you. And I'm a little stubborn, so I said, well, you have to tell me or I'm not going. And he said, well, all I can say is that America's been under attack.
ABC's Good Morning America is down in the general vicinity. Dan, can you tell us what has just happened?
Yes, Peter, it's Don Daly down here, 4 blocks north of the World Trade Center. The second building that was hit by the plane has just completely collapsed. The entire building has just collapsed as if a demolition team set off.
It was, anger, rage, sadness, remorse, confusion, but mostly just a terrible loss, just a sad, tragic loss.
There was a cloud of uncertainty. We did not know if this was just it. See, that's the problem. It was, a fully wised and capable enemy would have kept going.
I suspected there was more, and that so you're waiting for the rest of the story, but immediately knew that it was going to have a large impact on everything from that point forward.
No one knew just how far this was going. We had the 2 in New York, we had the 1 in the Pentagon, the 1 in Pennsylvania. What else is out there? Nobody knew.
And General Rainville took immediate action to call our operations officer in and our senior leaders, and immediately, she decided we need to defend, our armories. And we're gonna do it like right now.
When I got to the base, went straight to the command post, and when we were an air defense unit, we had a command post that was open all the time, and we had shut that down, I think, like 2 years prior, and it kind of showed. It was, the dust everywhere and everything.
And so that's when we all moved to the command post, which was not actually up and running. We only kind of used it when we had to or when we were exercising, so we had to bring that up to speed and call in extra people to start doing different jobs than they were normally doing, and fully understanding that the Vermont Air National Guard could have a role to play in this.
The phone was ringing off the hook. Talked to Cheyenne Mountain at NORAD and everything, and the question was, how do we go from we're in a training status to you want us over in New York armed as soon as possible?
To go from a peacetime configuration to a wartime configuration at a moment's notice with a National Guard unit is extremely challenging, because you don't have your full complement of people there. You, by definition, with a National Guard unit during the week, and it's not a drill weekend, you have about a quarter of your workforce there.
As events unfolded worldwide, we realized that this was going to be something that was going to be going on for some time.
We knew that we were going to need more people, because we figured that this operation wasn't going to be over quickly, and that we were going to need to eventually, rapidly go into 24-hour, 7-day-a-week operations, which you can't do with just your skeleton force that you have there on a regular full-time basis.
As a commander, I was getting phone calls all the way in from my people saying, should we be coming in? Do you want us in? What's going on? Calls and people showing up and retirees showing up, volunteering their time. Just phenomenal. group of individuals that came together without, nobody asked, you just did it.
And I was just watching the base just come alive and everybody just come alive with their responses.
We started basically reacting, anticipating and reacting the way we thought we needed to respond to this, which was to prepare the aircraft, because that was our job.
And they went as forward as they could without an order, so that when, in fact, the order came to load the aircraft, they were ready to do it immediately.
I dare say that I think there was some Vermont National Guard leadership that, without guidance and authority from above, took actions into their own hands to do the right thing, to get ourselves into the best possible deployment and reactionary state.
So we immediately started preparing aircraft, getting our maintenance organization, the rest of the organization prepared to get our aircraft ready to respond when headquarters would say what they wanted us to do.
We were activating the whole wing. We were setting up facilities. Our services folks were working hard to try to find billeting for people that lived outside the commuting area.
And then because operations leaned forward with that order, when NORAD in turn figured out what was going on and what needed to happen and gave the orders to the units that had that capability, and they said, you know, how soon can you get an aircraft on alert? The answer was basically, as soon as you tell us, we put them up on alert because they're ready for you.
Their direction is, tell us what you can get up, how fast, and how long. Because the direction was not another plane into another tower.
Because we didn't know. I mean, I was getting briefings from the CIA, military intelligence, everything else. We didn't know what might happen next. And all we knew was, if New York City's a target, they're going to face the Green Mountain Boys and they weren't going to get by. And that made this Vermonter very, very proud.
We were the closest base to get airplanes in the air. So I remember that we scrambled jets and we got jets in the air.
We kind of did this sequentially. First, we loaded all the airplanes with bullets, and then we did the next easiest thing, which was the heat-seeking missiles, and then the harder, more heavier missiles, the AIM-120, the radar missiles.
Along with that is the support of the other agencies, making sure that we have all the parts that are required, making sure we have the security that we need, making sure that, you know, when we execute these drills that we have the proper people in place to provide that same support. And that's exactly what we had when we did this activation of all the other pieces within the organization to make this thing successful.
We were prepared for the threat to always come from the outside, to come from outside the United States. This threat came from inside the United States. So it was a whole different change a whole different way of thinking. Then it was obviously the fog of war, the confusion factor.
There was no book for going to war inside the U.S., I guarantee you that. And that's a lot of the stuff we needed to figure out. You know, when do we arm our missiles, when do we not arm our missiles? Because every time you do some of these things, you do increased risk. We had to talk through all those things very quickly. And then the other thing we did was had a difficult conversation. So one of the things that we as the pilots all had was the all pilots to the briefing room call.
As pilots, we were sitting around in the mass briefing room and we were just throwing questions at our bosses saying, well, what happens if this happens? What do we do if this happens? What do we do here? What do we do there? And there were no answers.
We didn't know how long this was going to go on or how many other airliners had been taken over, and so these thoughts were like, we may have to go shoot down an airliner. Well, how do you do that?
There was a lot of discussion about, so what's the rules of engagement? You know, if this happens again, if there's more airplanes, are you going to shoot an airplane down?
Most of our people were airline pilots. And we had the discussion that said, we send you up there, you need to tell me right now if you're not comfortable with pulling the trigger. Because we had never dreamed that we'd have to do this.
I personally was very thankful that the people we had in the cockpits and the people we had in the wing leadership were experienced, and we had experienced commercial airline pilots who were also experienced fighter pilots. And that combination is exactly what we needed in a pilot that might have to make that decision.
And we were tasked with establishing a combat air patrol, a CAP, over New York. And even then, as we were heading down to New York, we really didn't know, exactly what our job was going to be, what our role was going to be. So when we got ready to taxi, and I called Burlington Ground, and they said, "Oh, you don't need to talk to us. You own the airport." Well, that's a strange call. You can taxi anywhere you want because you own the airport. I'll never hear that radio call again. And then we taxi up to the runway, and I call Tower, and Tower, Jumbo 01's ready for departure. And they're like, "You don't need to talk to us. You own the runway." All right, that's a little weird. We take off, and then we talk to Boston Center, and Boston Center says, "Oh, you don't need to talk to us. Just go directly to your military controller. You own the skies." And that's when it really kind of settled in. It's like, wow, this is real, because we own the skies. The military that day owned the skies.
So on the way down there, now Bear was leading, and we were just using our radars looking for airplanes. We did pick up, I think, 2 what we call bug smashers, but small private planes that we basically followed or observed going in and landing on private strips, or they were just so they weren't any threat to anything that we could tell. And then we just proceeded down to the city, and truly it's such a beautiful blue sky day. You could see smoke rising almost from the time we got airborne. And Scott and I were very busy, for those next few hours, intercepting helicopters and forcing them away from the city, and forcing all aircraft away from the Statue of Liberty. We weren't going to let anybody get near the Statue of Liberty. Didn't care who you were. You weren't going to get near the Statue of Liberty. And then about 9:30 at night, we get a call, said, "Oh, there's another aircraft, unknown rider, bullseye, 09015, 7000. We picked up a big target coming in off the ocean, and it turned out that we hadn't been warned about. So I swing around, I put a radar on them, and I get a hit on my radar, and I lock them up, and I'm like, contact there, say mission, tail type ID. And we tried to raise them. We were both trying to raise them on guard, which is a frequency that all civilians are supposed to monitor, and military has a different guard. And we're trying to raise them, and we got nothing. So I intercept. I spin Scotty, back to a 10-mile trail. So he's 10 miles behind me, and I intercept the aircraft, and it's an American Airline MD-80. It's a commercial aircraft, and it's not supposed to be there. And nobody knows why it's there. We didn't know who they were and what they were doing, and that was the airplanes, obviously, that had done the damage to New York and Washington, and that was a threat. So I tell the Hunter's controller, and I'm sure he's waiting for me to say it's a helicopter, it's this, and I said, nope. It's an American Airline commercial aircraft, MD-80. And I could hear his jaw hit the floor. And so he says, stand by. And so a couple minutes go by, and he says, okay, Noble Eagle 1, who's the head guy, authorizes a shoot down if you deem him doing something hostile. I'm like, oh. Okay, thanks for that. We, as soon as we got eyeballs got our eyes on him, which, a big airplane like that, I think we probably were seeing it visually at 20 miles. So then we just had to have one of us in the position to shoot, and one of us in the position to try to get on his wing and get his attention. It was never going to me be the one to shoot. It was going to be Scotty, because he was back there 10-mile trail with his jet ready, armed and ready to go if I gave the order. And we had a job to do, and at the time, your training kicks in, and you know what you're going to have to do if it comes to pass, if that airplane goes missed approach and is heading at the city, we didn't have options. At least that's the way we looked at it, I think. And that's the way I looked at it.
The runways at JFK LaGuardia are oriented basically northwest southeast. So if that aircraft had been landing to the southeast, it would have been coming in right over the city. And in that case, we would have shot it down.
If he went missed approach, now he's heading right at the city. We weren't going to take a shot until we knew he was a threat.
Scotty was back 10 miles, locked onto him, getting ready to shoot if I, as I'm watching them, if I thought that they were doing something, whether they veered, if they veered away from the airport, so I'm thankfully the pilot was good enough where he didn't mess up his approach, because if he had to go around, it would have been the last thing he did. So it all worked out.
A very intense 15 minutes, but fortunately, good guy, and they landed, and that was that. The whole world had changed at 8:45 that morning, and I think everybody was still trying to catch up.
It was shortly after that I went up with Bear Rogers and took the photo over the World Trade Center, or what remained of the World Trade Center.
That picture that you see that has become an iconic picture of the Vermont Air Guard's participation in 9/11. That was a picture taken of me by my wingman, Terry Moultrip.
We traveled down, and as we're coming into sight, it was another beautiful day, brilliantly clear blue skies, and you could see the smoke from the World Trade Center from a lot of miles out. I lined up Bear as we're going up the Hudson River, and then he flew off from me so that I could take some snapshots. But I never dreamed that it would go as far or be an iconic photo of the day.
For probably the first 4 days, I slept downstairs in my office. It was the same uniform, just slept on the floor with my coat and whatever, and took a shower and put the same uniform back on.
I didn't go home for like 3 or 4 days. And that was pretty much the standard for most of us. We actually stayed right on site.
Like I said, we flew 122 straight days, so we had people there 24 hours a day. The base isn't set up for 24-hour operation, and we just made it that way. We brought in, cots and blankets, and we had people sleeping, and I slept in my office when I did the night shift, and it was just the way we did it. Even though many of us live local, we had to be there during this time.
I flew, I believe it was like 90 to 100 hours over New York City in CAPs, in combat air patrols, and then I went into the command post and worked, all hours of the day and night.
We were working 12-hour shifts, 7 days a week. Our maintenance facilities worked very hard to make sure that our jets were capable, reliable, ready, and relevant. And that was our mantra through the whole process, was to ensure that those aviators got the best aircraft to do their mission, flying combat air patrol over New York City.
One of the aspects of this kind of event is people pulling together and making sure that you're watching out for each other and that kind of thing. So that camaraderie that's only built through stressful events such as a post 9/11 scenario.
If you think about how many people put their lives on hold, and not just the pilots, mechanics and fuelers and people who work in the back shops and the security forces, and everyone put their life on hold. And almost everyone was brought to active duty.
All of those airmen coming and supporting the mission, knowing that we had something important that we were doing, and without thought to their own families, their own jobs, and their own communities, and just were there.
The impact And the unknown for our families sometimes doesn't get recognized, and it's almost like it's a behind-the-scenes thing, but it's real. That makes you feel a little bit helpless, not being able to take care of your family and not be able to communicate with them and hold them and help them through this time because they're hurting. They see what's going on TV, and not being able to be there had a profound effect.
Then the other overwhelming memory is just the patriotism that you saw really from coast to coast. And here we were driving a rental car eastbound on interstate going straight through Nebraska, and the businesses, primarily like heavy equipment businesses that were along the highway, had raised all their cherry pickers and cranes to their ultimate level and had big American flags flying. Excuse me, it solidified the fact that the nation was mourning and going through this incredible event together, and it's something I never will forget.
Right after 9/11, somebody living here in the area had called my office. They said a week or so before they had written a letter to me complaining about the noise of the Air National Guard. And the staff member answered was, well, he's been a little bit busy. He hasn't seen the letter. And they said, thank goodness, tear up the letter. I think they sound wonderful. Now, instead of just the occasional flying, of course, they're hearing them going around the clock. And they said they sound wonderful. I told that story to the pilots, mechanics, the staff, everybody's there. I said, I'm so happy that you reacted that way because you deserve the applause. I was never so proud.
We were airborne over the city 24/7 between us and Otis, and after a while you wonder what you're doing, but we certainly didn't want to ever see it happen again on our watch, and it was we're glad that hopefully it never does.
The feat of flying over New York City for 122 days, that is takes a lot of effort from the whole base to make that happen. And other units were doing similar things at other cities. So, it's not just Vermont. But, that's where 9/11 was. And you usually put your best unit where you need it most. So I think that was, there was some pride that we weren't flying over, some no-name city. We were over New York City, where the work was still being done on the pile.
9/11 is such a watershed event, and I think, to a certain extent, our sense of innocence as a nation was rocked, and certainly from our military leadership right down to our citizens, nobody expected that our own airliners would be used as weapons against us.
It changed a quantum leap in the airline industry, as well as the military perspective, that this is a whole new security challenge that we're going to have to deal with, that using civilian airliners as weapons is something that we hadn't trained for.
We're a safer country today than we were back then. Well, we become safer by becoming stronger. We have become stronger, and we're going to continue to become stronger.
The National Guard on September 11th transitioned from a strategic reserve of the United States to an operational reserve. And in some ways, we'll metamorphose back a little bit less than that. The way the country relies on the National Guard will never go back to the strategic reserve that it was before.
Before 9/11, we probably had 4 or 5 full-time pilots. The rest of our pilots were traditional guardsmen. Some of them had carpentry businesses, some of them flew for the airlines, but they all had full-time jobs, and they just came in and they got their flying hours once a month or a couple times a month. And after 9/11, that really changed everything. And that changed the way the base was. We have every pilot now is a full-time pilot that works there.
I think the other thing that happened on September 11th is everybody realized that the homeland is a battlefield. And as an island nation, we've been blessed to really only be attacked on Pearl Harbor and 9/11. There are dangers at home, and I think the National Guard is an integral part of protecting our nation.
The reputation of the Green Mountain Boys has been forged both by combat and what we did in the early years.
It's a proud heritage, and it goes back to Ethan Allen and the Green Mountain Boys, back pre-Revolutionary War days, and then really got solidified during the Revolutionary War.
The strength is the fact that you have a fighter wing that comes to respond to a 9/11 event, but they're teachers, they're nurses, they're engineers, they're, you name it, out in the community. They're shop owners, they're merchants. They are the community, but they have these special skills and that desire to serve, and so they're there.
Vermont National Guard, the Army and the Air are known nationwide. The Green Mountain Boys set a high standard when they were first up in the air, and they just continued that. And for a little state, the number of people that we've put into the military and into harm's way, it's just mind-boggling.
I couldn't be prouder of having been in the Guard and served with the people that responded.
I think we've earned our reputation through performance, and so that's what we get when we go places. And certainly aviation enthusiasts, when they see our tail flash and see that we're from Vermont, they're always interested to chat with us. And there are so many great Air National Guard units out there, but we certainly carry the mantle of being one of the best.
Anywhere I am in the world, I'm always proud to say I'm a Green Mountain Boy. And people recognize that. It's not like you say, you know, even if I'm saying I'm from the Vermont Guard, they go, oh, you're a Green Mountain Boy. So sometimes you don't even have to say you're a Green Mountain Boy. They know, that's what we're known around the world for. And there's great pride to be able to say you're a Green Mountain Boy. It took a guy like Jonathan Blanchet to listen to some pilots late at night after a hockey game to say, hey, you don't know what you were doing and you don't know what you were doing. We got to do something about this. So again, I'm impressed by Jonathan's vision.
I'd like to thank Jonathan and Revision for kind of documenting this difficult but important period of American history.
This whole thing is wonderful that you guys, you guys are, and Jonathan is documenting this whole thing. It's an honor. It's an honor for us that he would take the time and the effort and the expense to basically put it down in history on film.